He was the last person to see her alive, and all he could remember were the 4 words she spoke to him through the car window. "No, I've called AAA." The bus driver, Butch Atwood, a large man with a kind, weary face, would replay that moment in the frigid New Hampshire air for the rest of his life. He'd pulled over his school bus-turned-personal vehicle on that dark, winding stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill just after 7 p.m. on February 9th, 2004. He saw a damaged car, a black Saturn, its front end crumpled against a snowbank, and he saw a young woman standing outside in the cold, her expression not one of panic, but of something else, a chilling, resolute calm. He offered her help, a warm place to wait in his house just up the hill. But she refused. She said she had already called for assistance. It was a lie. There was no record of such a call. And with that polite refusal, Maura Murray, a 21-year-old nursing student from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, stepped out of the glow of his headlights and vanished into the vast, frozen darkness, becoming one of the most enduring and perplexing mysteries in modern, true crime. To understand the gravity of that disappearance, you have to understand who Maura Murray was, and the portrait is a complex one of a promising life shadowed by recent, troubling cracks. On paper, she was an overachiever. The daughter of a retired Army officer, Fred Murray, she was a gifted student and a phenomenal athlete. In high school, she was a standout Nordic skier and runner. Her yearbook photo capturing a girl with dark, intelligent eyes and a determined smile. She followed her older sister, Kathleen, to West Point, a testament to her own discipline and drive. But the rigid structure of the military academy didn't suit her. She transferred to UMass Amherst to study nursing. There, she continued to excel, working as a campus security guard and maintaining her athletic physique. But beneath the surface, things were fracturing. Just days before her disappearance, she had a breakdown at her security job, sobbing uncontrollably after a phone call with her sister. The nature of that call has never been fully revealed, but it hinted at deep, personal turmoil. Then there was the accident. Or rather, the accidents. The weekend before she vanished, Maura was involved in a minor car crash in her father's new car. Fred, ever the practical problem solver, came up to help her sort it out. They spent time together, and he gave her his older Saturn sedan to use. He would later recall nothing out of the ordinary, just his bright, capable daughter. But on the day she disappeared, Maura was unraveling. She sent a cryptic email to her boyfriend, a fellow UMass student and nursing clinical instructor, Bill Rausch, and to her supervisors, saying she was taking a week off due to a death in the family. This, too, was a lie. There had been no death. That afternoon, she was seen on campus security footage, calm and collected, withdrawing $280 from an ATM. She then packed her car with boxes of her belongings, her textbooks, a favorite bottle of wine, and a volume on the psychology of notoriety called Not Without Peril. She drove north out of Massachusetts and into the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Her destination, if she had one, remains unknown. The journey ended, or simply transformed, on that lonely curve on Route 112. The scene that greeted police was bizarre, a tableau of quiet chaos. The Saturn was locked. Inside, they found the boxes she had packed, her textbooks, the wine bottle, now empty, and a single drop of what appeared to be red wine on the driver's side door pillar. There was no purse, no wallet, and, critically, no cell phone. The car's airbags had deployed in the crash, and a rag was stuffed in the tailpipe, a trick Fred Murray later claimed he had taught her to prevent fumes from entering the car if the exhaust was damaged. But the most haunting detail was the lack of footprints. A light snow had begun to fall. Around the car, in the fresh powder, there were no tracks leading into the dense, leafless woods, no path into the icy Swiftwater River nearby. It was as if the earth had simply opened up and swallowed her. The initial police assumption was that she was a runner, a drunk driver who had fled the scene to avoid a DUI. But as hours turned into days, that theory began to feel woefully inadequate. The investigation, led by New Hampshire State Police, was swift and massive, but it was also immediately hampered by the environment and the circumstances. Search teams with dogs scoured the woods. Helicopters with thermal imaging crisscrossed the sky. The river was dragged. Yet, the wilderness in winter is a formidable adversary. The cold preserves, but it also conceals. The dogs, picking up Maura's scent from a used glove in her car, tracked it a short way down the road, and then it vanished, as if she'd been picked up by a vehicle. This single piece of evidence became the fulcrum of the entire case, tipping the scales away from a tragic accident in the woods and towards something far more sinister. The tandem driver theory was born. Perhaps Maura wasn't alone. Perhaps she was meeting someone, or following someone, and after her crash that person picked her up and spirited her away. But who? And to what end? The focus then turned to the people in Maura's life, a cast of characters each with their own motivations and shadows. There was Bill Rausch, the boyfriend, a charismatic and intense young man who was hundreds of miles away in Oklahoma at the time, attending officer training. He was distraught, flying to New Hampshire immediately to join the search. But years later, a darker picture of Rausch would emerge, with allegations of controlling behavior and abuse from other women in his life, though nothing was ever directly linked to Maura's disappearance. There was her father, Fred Murray, a man consumed by a relentless, almost obsessive quest for answers. He became a fixture in Haverhill, plastering the area with missing person flyers, confronting the police, and accusing them of a bungled investigation. His grief was a raw, powerful force, but it also sometimes clashed with the methodical pace of the authorities. And then there were the locals. Butch Atwood, the bus driver, became an unwilling central figure. He was interviewed repeatedly, his story scrutinized. He died just a few years later, taking whatever else he might have seen or heard to his grave. As the days bled into weeks with no body, no ransom note, no credible sightings, the theories began to metastasize. Was it a random abduction? Route 112, though rural, was a known thoroughfare. Had a bad actor, as the police termed it, happened upon a vulnerable young woman in a compromised situation? The possibility of a local predator was investigated, but no strong suspects emerged. Another theory, fueled by the strange lies and her packed car, suggested Maura was running away to start a new life, a voluntary disappearance. But this seemed implausible. She had taken no money, left behind her essential documents, and had shown no long-term planning. The most chilling theory, and the one her family vehemently rejected, was the suicide by wilderness idea. Proponents pointed to her recent emotional distress, the cryptic emails, the emptied wine bottle. But it didn't fit the scene. If she intended to walk into the woods to die, why were there no tracks? Why would she refuse Butch Atwood's help only to embark on a fatal trek? The pieces refused to form a coherent picture. The case grew cold, but it never faded. It was kept alive by a dedicated community of online sleuths, bloggers, and podcasters who dissected every scrap of evidence, every rumor, every timeline discrepancy. They created intricate maps, analyzed phone records, and proposed their own complex scenarios. This digital vigilante justice brought new attention but also a storm of speculation and harassment, turning a family's private tragedy into a public obsession. Fred Murray, desperate for any forward momentum, filed a lawsuit to force the police to release their files, a legal battle that dragged on for years and only deepened the chasm of mistrust between the family and the authorities. The official investigation, meanwhile, seemed to stall, a silent monolith offering no answers, only a persistent, frustrating silence. Then, years later, a glimmer of a break, not from the police, but from the relentless march of time and technology. In 2022, a team of investigators working a new lead focused on a specific local. They conducted ground-penetrating radar scans at a house in Haverhill, a property once occupied by a man who had since died. The search was clandestine, hushed. Nothing was found, but the very act of it sent a ripple through the community, a sign that someone, somewhere, still had a theory they believed in enough to act upon. It was a reminder that the ground in New Hampshire still held secrets. But the real turning point, the moment that felt like a seismic shift in the foundation of the case, came not from a shovel in the dirt, but from a revelation about the very first moments of the investigation. The climax of this story isn't a dramatic courtroom confession, but a quiet, devastating discovery about a piece of evidence everyone thought they understood. For years, the official narrative stated that the Saturn was found locked. This small detail was a cornerstone of the mystery. It suggested Maura had planned to return, or had taken a moment to secure her belongings before— what? Getting into a car? Being forced into one? But in a recent podcast interview, a former police official involved in the case revealed a shocking truth. The car was not locked. The responding officer, the first on the scene, had actually opened the driver's side door to check the registration. He found it unlocked. This single, corrected fact changes everything. It shatters the image of a deliberate, calm Maura securing her car before vanishing. It opens up the possibility that someone else was in that car after she was gone. It means the scene was not pristine. It was accessible. This wasn't a magic trick. It was, perhaps, a contaminated crime scene from the very beginning, a critical error that may have allowed trace evidence to be lost, or worse, planted the seed for nearly 2 decades of misguided speculation. The great, impenetrable mystery of Maura Murray was, in part, built on a foundational mistake. Maura Murray has not been seen for 20 years. Her father, Fred, aged and weathered by his long, lonely crusade, passed away in 2023, never knowing what happened to his daughter. The case remains open, a ghost in the system. The theories will continue to swirl: the abduction, the escape, the accident, the foul play. But at its heart, this story is no longer just about what happened on a cold night in February. It's about how a single, simple human error can send an investigation careening down the wrong path for decades. It's about the terrifying ease with which a person can vanish. And it's about the haunting power of a few fleeting words spoken in the dark, a brief exchange between 2 strangers that became the final, fragile thread connecting a lost girl to the world. She stepped away from a damaged car on a lonely road, and in doing so, she became a permanent resident of the Shadowlands between fact and legend, a reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only remembered. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.